right. Hey, remember, I've told you in multiple videos I'm not a lawyer, so seek your own legal advice, but here's my thoughts on these documents and the way I use them in my experience. As is addendum to purchase agreement. Look at this. I love this. As is in quotation marks, right? I always think of the Friends episode where Joey doesn't know how to use air quotes. It's pretty funny. But this means colloquial, colloquial phrasing. It's a way of saying something that we all have a general idea of what it means, but there's no legal ramifications until there's a document placed behind it. So I'm selling my house as is. Okay, great. What's the seller telling you? The seller's telling you we don't plan on doing repairs because we don't have the money, don't have the time, don't have the context, just don't want to do it because we're lazy. All kinds of different reasons why they might do that. It's an estate sale. Again, they just want to be lazy, or it's maybe a burden to dig into estate dollars, or maybe there's no estate dollars to be dug into to do repairs. So they're more than anything, I'm going to say when a listing says we want to sell as is, I'm going to believe the best in people here. I'm going to say they are just warning a buyer that, listen, we're not fixing anything. So when you have your inspections, you could be throwing good money after bad because we're not going to fix something. So you better be prepared to just waste $500-$600 on inspections because that's the end of the story. Okay, that's what they're saying. And I think that's good to do if that's truly the case. I don't list homes as is hardly ever because I explain to my clients why we don't do that. Like, it's like threatening to spank your kids. No, you either spank them or you don't spank them, but you don't threaten them because then it just gets things confusing. So I don't list as is because I feel like that can come across as a threat. And I've had so many buyers that their initial, and I know that other agents aren't as good as we are, so they're not explaining this well. And when their buyer sees that the house is sold as is, they go, ooh, well, I can't buy that one because it's as is and I don't have any money to do repairs either. Well, the way I explain it to my listing client, and I know we're not into the document yet, I say, no, the reason we don't list as is, we don't mention those words, is because if somebody offered you $50,000 over your list price, you're at $200,000, they offer you $250,000. Then they do an inspection and there's a $5,000 problem. Are you going to fix that? So now your net's $245,000 and you really all you wanted was $200,000. So for $45,000, you just have to fix this one small $5,000 problem. Will you fix that problem? Will you figure out some way to get that done? Borrowing from a friend, getting a contractor that'll get paid at closing. You're going to figure it out, right? Yes, perfect. That's why we don't list as is. Because you're going to figure it out. If the numbers work, it's going to work. You don't, why would you threaten and reduce your buyer pool by listing as is? Okay? But in the event a listing agent and a seller are not bright enough to know that this is a terrible document for them. By the way, this as is addendum, in my opinion, and in a whole lot of other people's opinion, is good for a buyer, although ignorant sellers and listing agents think it's good for them. It's not. I used this document for 2 years, tricking agents, thinking, honestly, we didn't trick them. We used the appropriate documents, but because they didn't understand it, we won so many offers as with our buyers because we understand that this document was great for the buyer, even though the seller thought it was good for them. I stay away from this document when I'm selling. If I'm buying and they really want it, I'll give it to them. It's a terrible idea for the seller, but I'll give it to them. And then But I generally, even then, sometimes I explain to the listing agent, hey, you really don't want an as-is addendum, okay? And I'm going to give you the reason why. I know this is boring. You're staring at a screen. You can't see my face. I'm excited about all this. I love this. But the reason as-is addendums are so bad is because when we do a normal inspection period, the seller is in the driver's seat, right? Buyer does an inspection, buyer finds some defects, buyer by contract has to give the seller a chance to remedy the defect. Seller can go, I'll remedy it, and they move on with the deal. Seller can go, I'm not remedying it, and then the ball's back finally in the buyer's court to move forward with the deal or to cancel it. With an as-is addendum, you've shifted the power of no onto the buyer. Buyer does an inspection, buyer finds a defect, buyer cancels the transaction autonomously without giving the seller a chance to fix it. It is an easy escape for a buyer that changes their mind about buying the house. It is stupid for a seller to use this. I have yet to have a scenario where it makes sense. Like, so what? I'm telling you, as a listing agent, do not use this document if you can at all help it, because do not let this come in on an offer, because let them do an inspection. They're going to do one without as is or with as is. They're going to do an inspection. The difference is what happens when a defect is found. We're going to get to it. But when a defect is found during a traditional inspection period, the buyer has to give your seller a chance to repair it. You can say no, and then effectively we are at the as-is period, point where a buyer is going to then decide to move forward with the deal or cancel the deal. Okay? So a traditional as-is just means the buyer doesn't have to ask you to fix it. So they just get to kill it on you randomly. Are you following me? Regular inspection period. Buyer inspects, buyer finds defects, buyer asks the seller drives the bus. I'm doing it and the deal closes. I'm not doing it, and then the buyer gets to decide whether or not they want to kill the deal. During the as-is, buyer inspects, buyer finds defects, buyer just kills the deal. See why it's terrible for a seller? I just don't understand why people want them. All right, as-is addendum to purchase agreement. The addendum dated, this is the date that we're writing the contract, is attached to the purchase agreement that's dated this. So it could be dated different dates. Seldom is it that way, but the purchase agreement date in the top left is the date that would go in this line. On the property, no, and it's going to pop in the address here if you've done your zip form set up correctly. Okay? Now, we're just going to walk through this. Except as modified by this addendum, all the other terms and conditions in the purchase agreement remain in full force and effect. If there's a conflict between the terms and conditions of this addendum and the terms in the purchase agreement, the conditions of this addendum prevail. Okay? Number 2. So, anyway, if there's a conflict, this addendum prevails. Otherwise, everything stays the same with the purchase agreement. Seller and buyer acknowledge and agree that the property is being sold in its existing, quote, as is, end quote, condition. And the seller shall not be responsible for the repair, replacement, or modification of any deficiencies, malfunctions, or mechanical defects on the property, or to any improvements thereon, including but not limited to the material, workmanship, or mechanical components of the structures, foundations, roof, heating, plumbing, electrical, or sewage system, drainage or moisture conditions, air conditioning, hot water heater. It's pretty funny. It's not a hot water heater, guys. It's a water heater. It becomes hot water once it's been heated. So it's a water heater, not a hot water heater. Appliances or damaged by the presence of pests, molds, or other organisms. Pause. It's being sold in its current condition, and the seller is not responsible for the repair, replacement, or modification of any deficiencies. Okay, guess what? Seller's never responsible for the repair, replacement, or modification. Not required. Until everybody agrees that they are. So this is redundant. This is the same as the traditional inspection. There is a lion in the attic, there is mold in the basement, and their house is currently on fire during the inspection. Buyer goes, hey, seller. Tells them the things that are wrong. Seller goes, all right, well, buy it or don't buy it. Same thing here too. They're not responsible. You don't have to fix radon. You don't have to fix mold. You don't have to fix the washing machine that's broken. You don't have to fix the roof that's got a hole in it. Like, seller's never obligated to fix these issues, except for further in the contract if something goes wrong after we've all agreed to certain things. But come on, like, read these documents. You'll see that the seller shall not be responsible for the repair. But the seller's not responsible for the repair on the other type of inspection either. Okay? You can tell I'm pretty excited about this document in kind of a negative way, but in a positive way because I know about it. And knowing about it gives me a lot more power than the people that haven't read it and don't understand it. And that can be you. Here we go. Seller makes no representation or warranty to buyer, either express or implied, as to the condition of the property, the zoning of the property, the suitability of the property for the buyer's intended use or purpose, or any other, like literally, we make no representations. However, seller represents and warrants that the seller will maintain and repair the property so that the property will be in substantially the same condition on closing date as the effective date of the purchase agreement, right? So if the furnace breaks after we're in contract, the seller still has to fix it, okay? That's important to remember. That's that way all the time. But, we fill out that seller's disclosure, and I think we'll get to that here, but, this form does not change the seller's obligation to disclose actual material known defects, okay? You still have to tell them problems if there's problems, even though you're selling as is. But right there, it says the seller makes no representation or warranty to buyer. They either express or implied as the condition of the property, blah, blah, blah. So the seller's disclosure is weird here. I don't know how to make sense of it because I'm disclosing to the buyer that the furnace doesn't work, but then I'm telling them that I'm not making any, representations regarding anything. So kind of confused, but at the end of the day, we're going to get to undisclosed defects, which is hilarious that we literally have them within lines of each other, that we're not making representations, and then undisclosed defects. That contradicts itself. In my opinion, I'm not a lawyer. Go talk to one. Buyer reserves the right to have and shall order all independent inspections after acceptance of the purchase agreement. If buyer's inspections, and I'm going to play, this after acceptance. This is small, but it's important. If you had an inspection prior to the offer, you now have disclosed defects, and you cannot use that inspection to kill this deal. The inspections have to be done after acceptance of the purchase agreement. But if you brought your inspector with you to the showing, then you can order another one and use that one, but you already know about the defects that were in the first inspection. So you got to be careful. I've had this come up one time, and I had to use that against somebody once because they had their contractor there, and they were in the attic, and you knew about all this stuff. So check it out. If buyer's inspections uncover any previously undisclosed defects in the property, previously undisclosed defects. Defects are defined. Well, they defined them here in this new document. They're defined in the purchase agreement as well. Buyer shall have 10 days beginning the day following the date of acceptance of the purchase agreement to do one of two things. Terminate, in which case earnest money shall be promptly returned. Or two, seller shall have no obligation whatsoever to correct any defects to repair the property as a result of such inspections, and buyer waives the defect and proceeds with the deal. So you have 10 days to inspect and terminate. That is what you are reserving the right to do as a buyer. Inspect and terminate. Inspect and terminate. Tell your buyer that. You may not negotiate. You did not reserve the right to inspect and negotiate. You reserve the right to inspect and terminate. Okay? If the buyer does not terminate the agreement in writing or request additional time to respond within the 10 days or whatever's up there time period, the property is deemed automatically acceptable. Okay? So this is huge. Previously undisclosed, you may terminate without any questions asked, or you may continue moving forward. Defect defined. Under Indiana law, defect means, I'm going to say it the way I always say it, significantly and adversely affects the value of the property, health or safety of the future occupants, or if not repaired, removed, replaced, would shorten the life of the premises. Okay? That's what a defect is. So if it doesn't fall inside of that, it's not a defect. It's subjective, I understand, but that's where the fights are going to occur. Is it a defect or is it not a defect? Well, we're going to look here, and then your buyer is going to make a decision with their attorney whether or not it's truly a defect. An inspection response by buyer requesting credits or repairs in violation of this as-is addendum shall allow seller to terminate the purchase agreement by serving a notice of termination to buyer, and earnest money shall be promptly returned to the buyer. Notice of termination is a newer form this year, is a one-sided kill of the deal, because if you try to request credits or repairs, then you are violating the as-is. Remember? What did you do? You reserve the right to inspect and terminate, not inspect and negotiate. I don't care if this is an inspection response on paper, over the phone, in an email. I think any suggestion to request credits or repairs is in violation, and absolutely the seller may kill the deal. Okay, so if your buyer starts to head that direction, say, well, we can do it, but the seller may just straight up kill the deal. So as long as you're okay with them killing the deal, because you're not planning on buying the house with that hole in the roof, so we might as well turn around and say, guys, if you'll fix the hole or give us $5,000, we'll stay in it. If they say yes, great, you move on. If they say we're killing the deal, then it's a dead deal. If the seller says no, and you guys say, well, okay, we tried, but we'll keep buying it, and the seller will allow it, then great. But you are risking it by having any negotiations that they might kill the deal, and then you're out of luck. All right. Remember, so I'm going to bump back up here. If the buyer does not terminate within the 10 days that was up there, or request additional time, I don't care if they agree to the request. If you request additional time, there is a document for that, called a request for extension of time to respond or something like that. The request alone eliminates this deemed acceptable automatic thing. So if you're not going to make your time period with a termination and you're still thinking or whatever, send a request for extension. Whether or not accepted, you don't automatically accept the property. Down to number 6, seller acknowledges and agrees that the property as is does not relieve, we talked about this, relieve the seller from applicable legal obligations to disclose any and all known material defects in the property and the improvements thereon, if any, the problems, to the buyer. Seller shall have the water, gas, electricity, and all operable pilot lights on for the buyer's inspections. Seller must make all areas of the property available for buyer's inspections. So you're going to get listings that are going to say electricity's not on, seller's not going to turn them on, blah, blah, blah. Well, bad news. It says right here that you're going to. So unless this has been stricken, they're in breach of the contract, if they don't have all of the proper things on for the buyer's inspection. And I am going to say that all areas of the property available means they need to dig up their septic lid and make it available for inspections. I literally am in the middle of a deal right now where I spent the last week harping on the listing agent saying you need to dig up the septic lid because we're having a septic inspection. You need to dig up the septic lid. You need to dig up the septic lid. Finally, they got it done. They found it and they dug it up. Because that would, in my opinion, a buried septic lid is not you making the septic tank accessible for inspections. It'd be like screwing your attic access shut. Inspector is not going to unscrew it. Inspector is not going to dig up your yard to find the septic lid. So a seller has to have all areas of the property available for the buyer's inspection. Buyer acknowledges and agrees that A, buyer has been advised to seek appropriate counsel regarding the risks of buying as is. Neither buyer nor seller's respective brokers or qualified licenses are required to conduct due diligence and hold harmless. Buyer expressly releases us, blah, blah, blah. It's another cover your butt situation. Then everybody has to sign this. So this, if you mark on the purchase agreement that this is, you got waived inspections, you've got reserves the right to have inspections, and you've got as is, this property sold as is. You'll see at the end of that line on the purchase agreement where we mark as is, Is Addendum. Well, this is the addendum that goes along with the purchase agreement in the offer So you're going to send the purchase agreement and you'll send this as is addendum at the same time, fully signed by your buyer. And if the seller accepts everything, they're going to sign this and the purchase agreement at the same time. All right. That is the as is addendum. A lot of information, and you can always ask questions in the comments or shoot me an email.